Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with another Doctor Who deck, and this one is the War Doctor with the companion of Adric Mathematical Genius. This deck comes to us from donation from Lexa. Thank you so much, Lexa, for always supporting the channel. And they say, here's a War Doctor beats deck that's looking to get a massive amount of counters on the War Doctor to just bolt someone to death. Has Cascade cards in there more for how they work with the commander than how they, to use them to cascade into cards. Absolutely, we're going to take a look. I really like the War Doctor, and I'm really excited about this. One of my friends has just built the War Doctor recently, so the War Doctor has been on my mind, so I'm excited to be able to talk about it. But before we get any further, this is a great time to remind you that if you would like me to make a video on one of your decks, there's a form in the link. There's a form in a link in the video description down below. And there is also a link down there that if you would like your video to be the next one I make, there is an ability to bring your video to the front of the queue. And finally, if you'd like to take a look at this deck list yourself, maybe look at it while you listen to me, or maybe look at it after the fact, that'll also be in the video description. So let's start off with who the War Doctor is and why they are the head of this deck. The War Doctor is a 4-mana Boros that's red-white, 3/5 Time Lord Doctor. They have two abilities, both of them very strong. The first one says, whenever one or more other permanents phase out, and whenever one or more other cards are put into exile from anywhere, put a time counter on the War Doctor. And then the second ability is whenever the War Doctor attacks, it deals damage equal to the number of time counters on it to any target. And if a creature that was dealt damage this way would die in this turn, exile it instead. Wow, that's a lot of text. But it's one of those cards that, like, reading the text is longer than actually understanding what the card does. The first half is nice and simple. If you exile a card or phase a card for any reason, or anyone does that, the War Doctor will get a counter. And this has a very interesting mechanic with Cascade, which is what Lexa was talking about, where the way Cascade works makes it so every time you flip a card for Cascade, that counts as a counter because you're flipping until you reach the card. And because you have to, every time you flip a card, you have to stop and reveal it. Every additional card you exile, you flip face up into exile, is an additional trigger on the War Doctor. So if you Cascade, especially with a smaller Cascade, which is not going to, you don't have a lot of cards underneath that mana cost, you are going to put a lot of counters on the War Doctor. A lot. So that's a lot of strength right there. Then very straightforwardly, having a creature that's a 3/5 that on attack will just deal direct damage based on the number of counters is really strong. It's really nice that it can also get rid of large creatures and exile them, so not only will that grow the War Doctor further, but it'll also get rid of like reanimation targets or other creatures that are difficult to handle, which is really, really nice. But the goal is very straightforwardly, you attack with the War Doctor, and with that, you just do a very large amount of damage to an opponent, and maybe multiple opponents at once. But let's not get too far ahead and look at our companion, Adric Mathematical Genius. This is what makes our deck Jeskai, with our companion being blue. So Adric is a 1/1 for 2 human artificer, and they have two abilities. The first one is for 2 and a blue, you can copy target activated or triggered ability you control, and you can choose new targets. This is a pretty normal kind of copy effect. And they have a second ability that says Ultimate Sacrifice, where you sacrifice this creature and 1 in a blue, and you counter an activated or triggered ability. Maybe this has just spoiled what happens to the character for me. All right, maybe I don't need to watch this part of Doctor Who anyways. All right, perfect. So This is an interesting companion. I'm going to actually suggest another one when we get to additions, but until then, I do like the versatility of this card. Now, it is a mana sink card, so we are looking to have 3 mana open when we attack with the War Doctor, so we can get 2 triggers, or we can occasionally use this to get another trigger for another time counter, but that's not as ideal because it's 3 mana for a single trigger. We generally want to keep this up for the attack trigger and hopefully hit two targets, maybe 2 players or the same player twice. Having this counter target activated or triggered ability is going to be strong depending on your pod. If someone has Thassa's Oracle combo, this is going to be very, very good. For a lot of other things, not so much. You know, there's a lot of decks that use triggered abilities, but most of them focus on redundancy as opposed to having one really big trigger. So, you know, I think aristocrats, I think engine decks, I think landfall decks, you know, I guess landfall are engine decks, but still, you know, you can counter one of these triggers, but it's not really meaningful because there's going to be so many others. So outside of some very specific cards, we're mainly going to be using that first half. All right, let's take a look at the deck itself. And the deck is in a pretty good condition. It's got a bit of a curve that's really in the middle. We don't have a lot of 1-drops, but I do like it mostly. I think this deck is kind of in a position where it's finding exactly where it wants to hang out. You know, it's got quite a few of different Doctor Who cards. Some are good, some are less good. It has a nice infinite combo with Saheeli Ray and Felidar Guardian. I'm always a fan of that. And has a nice like variance in kind of strength. The power of the deck is medium to high, and it is the consistency of it that I'd like to kind of check out a little bit. So also worth noting, let's see, our commander is 4 mana. And we can see 4 mana is one of our higher mana costs. And this is a bit tricky because our commander, the War Doctor, is definitely, like, we definitely want to cast him as soon as possible because the rest of our deck kind of works only with him in mind, right? Like, all of these exile triggers aren't going to do that much without the War Doctor here. Now, I personally really tend to like our 4 mana commanders because it means that we could be playing a lot of mana rocks. I say, looking at the lack of mana rocks. Let's come back to that in a second, but one of the strengths of a 4 mana commander is that you can go turn 2, you know, Boros Signet, or turn 2 Felwar Stone even, and then turn 3 you're able to cast your commander, which is something I really like about 4 mana commanders. So maybe let's come back to that and talk about mana rocks. I didn't even notice that. I have all my cards ready to suggest, but I didn't notice that. So looking at our 4-drops is where I'm going to start, because I would really like to cut some of these if possible. Let's see. First, we have Danny Pink, Mentor, creatures you control, or whenever more counters are put on this card for the first time each turn, draw a card. I do like this as being something that can draw us like at least a card every turn with our commander out. But I don't know if that's going to work out. It's the same mana cost as our commander. I think I'd much rather just have something that like either repeatedly draws a card a turn or just a more general kind of interactive card. I just don't love the fact that it's the same mana as our commander and is kind of dependent on our commander. The Mentor is nice, but this isn't a deck that is seeking to attack often with our other creatures. So for me, I don't like Danny Pink so much. Dark Apostle says the next non-creature spell you have this turn has Cascade. So we have a lot of Cascade, and I don't think we need to run every single available one because that might be overkill. You know, 1 or 2 Cascades, if you can cast 1 or 2 Cascades a game, I think that's more than enough to make the Doctor into a very, very big threat. And this is definitely one of the clunkier ones. It's a 4-mana 3/3 that doesn't do anything when it comes into play, and then you need to pay 3, tap it, so it needs to lose Summoning Sickness, and then you need to cast a non-creature spell. That's a lot of hoops to jump through to get a Cascade, and depending on, as mentioned before, certain ones of our non-creature spells are going to be much higher mana, and we want lower mana Like, we do have the ability to kind of, you know, use it with Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares to hit one of the 2, 3, 4 free or 0 mana spells, which is ideal. But even then, this just feels like a lot of work to cascade, and that's kind of all it does. So at 4 mana, once again, I'm not too interested in this. I think we can cut that for sure. Felidar Guardian is a combo piece. I like it. I'm not going to complain. Kate Stewart really took me a little bit of time to figure it out. So she has 2 abilities. One relevant, one not so much. The first one is that whenever you put time counters on a permanent, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, which is nice because it does work with how our commander works, because we are not putting multiple time counters at a time. They're going one at a time. So we will always get the same amount of time counters as we will get 1/1 white soldier creatures, which is nice. I do like this aspect of it. Then her second ability is like a very high mana attack trigger that's very dependent on time counters, which our commander has a lot of. But notice this is a card that really, really needs our commander to do anything. Without our commander out, she doesn't do anything, really. And with that in mind, her being the same mana cost, I think it's just a little too clunky. The final thing is, she'll need to attack and you'll need to pay 8 mana. Like, that's a lot of work to get her second half going. Otherwise, most of the time, she's a 3/3 that creates 1/1s. And I think, you know, at token producers, you can do a little better if that's what you wanted. If you wanted it for defense, you have better defensive options. I'm going to say overall, I think this card is rather clunky for the deck. I think Palace Jailer is fine. We do have ways to blink them, so I don't mind the fact that we can't. Like, this card is really strong in 1v1, but not so strong in multiplayer, sorry. But it is really nice to get the Monarch. We are an aggressive deck, and we have the means to destroy blockers or attackers, so I don't mind it. I think it's just a little clunky. The Monarch, I mean, not so much the Jailer. But I do like that it will trigger our commander, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. Moving on, Renogade Silent is not a card I particularly like. Especially, so I do like that it goads a creature every turn. I like that it grows, and I get the reason it's here is that it phases out every turn, putting another trigger on our commander. But I don't really think that all those parts add up to the, how do I phrase this? It is not greater than the sum of its parts, right? All of its abilities are kind of disconnected, and mainly disconnected from our game plan. And then if we add in the fact that it's a 4 mana commander, it's just not really where I want to be. I think it's just a subpar creature in a deck, and it's probably, you're not going to be happy to cascade into it. You're not going to be happy to play it. It's cute, and you know, if you really wanted that, you want a card that goads repeatedly, there's much better options at different mana costs. Obviously, we have our commander. Eowyn I like here, so I'm not going to say no. She's a very, very strong card and very proactive in the fact that you can throw her out and just start attacking with her and get a full attack in with protection. I guess she's still reactive. Especially that when we have some blink options, which maybe we should be looking at a few more blink options, because it seems like you have a lot of cards that benefit from blinking, but otherwise I think Eowyn's fine. I have no problem here. Let's go here. So Tales of the Ancestors is a foretell card, so it's actually not 4 mana, so I have no problem here. Throes of Chaos, I don't love, but it is one of the strongest cascade enablers in your deck because you can cast it multiple times, so I don't mind it here. Behold the Multiverse is also a foretell card, so that's fine. I will say I don't love the foretell cards here. I don't think they often are strong cards, and most of the time you're probably foretelling them before your commander's out, so the added benefit of exiling them isn't really happening. Like, you're just dividing the cost of these spells, which isn't bad, mind you, but I don't think they're really the strongest cards to be playing. So that is something I think that's worth considering. Kraken Time. Kraken Time is interesting to me. So it's vanishing 3, and you exile every, what is it? You exile a creature each turn on the start of on ETB and on each pre-combat main phase. I think without proliferation, I don't particularly like this card. It has a really nice method of like taking out what 2 creatures, right? Because on the third one it vanishes. So I do like that, but I really think it needs. Now we do have the ability to put a few counters with. I always forget what it's called. Time travel, but I would want a few more. The Kraken Time is just not that great if all you do is play it and then get rid of a few creatures and then they get them back. It doesn't even phase them out, so the ETBs will trigger again of your opponent's cards. It won't even exile your own creatures, which is a huge bummer because I think that would be really, really strong. So all in all, once again, at 4 mana, I don't really like it. Let's look at the last 2. The Flux. Interesting. This is good. I think this is fine. This is one of those that I've read long ago and I need to reread now. I do like its abilities 2 to 5, so overall I think this is a perfectly fine card. I think that's good. And phasing of Zhalfir is okay. I get that it's a board clear, and I think that's fine. It's very bad against token decks, which I think you have kind of a hard time with, to be honest. But even then, I think this is fine. I think I'm gonna like. We don't have Blastus Act, and I'm gonna suggest it, but I think this is a weaker board clear, and it's mainly here for the phasing. And I do get that it's on theme, and I think that's perfectly fine. Okay, let's take a look at a few other cards that kind of catch my eye before we go into additions. So let's look at our artifacts. TARDIS is a card I still don't really like every time I see it. And now we've got a deck that really can use the Cascade. But I think it's so much work to make this good, right? You need your commander out or another doctor out. You need to be able to crew this. You need to be able to attack with it, and you gotta hope it doesn't get destroyed, which it has flying, thankfully, so the odds are low. But you need this to be able to get through and not die to use it more than once. And then after all that, you still need the additional mana to cast a spell to Cascade. And like I said with our demon, our Dark Apostle, Warlock. This is just a little too much work, I think, to get the Cascade. I think it's just a little too much. Even in decks that could use this even further, I still really don't like TARDIS. I just think it's really, really clunky, and you have to really like it for the fun of the flavor. Otherwise, it's not going to do what you want it to do. Unlicensed Hearse is interesting. I do like it, but I don't know to what degree it's going to be very useful. It just turns into a beater, and I guess I don't have much of a problem. I guess like maybe my question is, why isn't this Rest in Peace? Because I feel like Rest in Peace will just do the job better. And Rest in Peace, every time a card goes, it will go into exile, and the ETB will only trigger 1 time counter, but every subsequent one will get your commander to have extra time counters. And I don't think we have a lot of graveyard synergy, so I really do think it is rather good. So yeah, I think just flat out this should just be Rest in Peace. You're going to get way more triggers, it's going to be way more powerful, and you won't worry about crewing it. You won't beat down opponents, but I think the biggest threat against the Hearse is that when you turn into a creature, someone might remove it. And artifacts are easier to remove than enchantments. So I just think this should be Rest in Peace. Confession Dial. I had to read this a bunch of times, and even then, I'm not too sure what we can do with this. Now, 1, obviously it works against the Rest in Peace card that I just suggested, but 2, I'm not sure why this is here. I get the idea is that we can rebuy our commander at regular price in exchange for 3 extra, exiling 3 cards from our graveyard, and which are the 3 cards that are put into there by Surveil. But unless we can just, like, unless we're just blinking this all of the time to get the Surveil triggers, I just don't really like this, right? Surveil counts as one packet of Exile. Oh, not even Exile, it goes in the graveyard, so it doesn't matter. So Escape is one, I believe it's one packet because you're paying all the Escape at once. So this just feels really clunky. You're not really going to use this except for in really specific scenarios. And even then, when you let your commander go to the graveyard, there is a real risk that someone can react to you trying to bring it out. Even with this, like, you know, they can counter the spell, or they can, yeah, it's casted, so they can counter the spell and leave it in your graveyard because it never... No, it goes out on the stack, so if it's countered, you can take it out. Okay, so that's not so bad, but still, I don't really love it. I think this card is clunky. It's at 3 mana, and I'd rather it be a mana rock. I initially, when I looked at this, I was like, oh, at least it taps for mana. And it took me a second to realize that no, it actually doesn't tap for mana. So I'm not much of a fan for it. This is a mana rock that in theory grows in strength. I don't really like it. I wish it was 2 mana. I think 3 mana, is 3 mana the highest? Yeah, 3 mana is the highest mana cost in the deck, and I might be suggesting more 3 mana cards. So things like this they really kind of, I don't like them, especially as mentioned before. The real power, you know, of a 4 mana commander is that a 2 mana rock can allow you to play the commander on the 3rd turn, whereas a 3 mana rock doesn't quite do it. And though this is nice because, you know, it is a mana sink, I don't think this is the kind of deck that needs a mana sink. You're already at 34 lands, which I wouldn't mind being 36, and you're low on mana rocks. I'd much rather, you know, this is the kind of deck where you're just putting out your cards turn by turn. And speaking of mana sinks, I mean, you have your companion is a mana sink, so I don't think you really need another one. Untap another not target. Sorry, I have to reread the Doctor Who cards every single time. Then it phases out. When it leaves, it phases in. So this just lets you permanently phase something out. I guess it's fine. I'm trying to think how this is better than, you know, simply a Oblivion Ring effect. And I think obviously you can change your targets as you want to. This seems tricky. This seems like a lot of work to not really do as much as I'd like. Like, what is the benefit of this over just like Swords to Plowshares, which you are playing, and I do really like, but like, this is just really tricky, and I don't think it does enough to be tricky. Like, you don't have a lot of artifact synergy. You don't have a lot of tap-untap synergy. You don't have cards that, I guess, like, outside of our commander, do we have a bunch of cards that really care when things phase in and out? I know they're probably going to be Doctor Who cards, and I don't know all of them, but it seems a little clunky. And so I'm not a very big fan of it. Cool art, though. I do wonder what this thing does in the TV show, but I have no idea otherwise. Let's see. The rest of these I do rather like. I have no problem with. Let's see. I'm pretty sure the rest of these are generally fine. I don't see anything that kind of sticks out to me. Bloodb Marauder, I will say, I don't really... I need you to play this deck a bunch to find out how consistently you can get the Delirium. Because I don't know how consistently you can, and how long this card just kind of this is just dead in your hand, or you'll cascade into it at the wrong time and it's just wasted. I'm not sure. It is a very strong card, but does require a lot of build around. Okay, let's go into additions. So I didn't put the mana rocks, but I will say I would like you to consider some mana rocks for sure. but let's see where we can start at. Okay, the strongest thing I'd like to talk about is the companion. And I want to suggest instead Clara Oswald. And I don't like saying this about companions, but I really do think she is probably the best in slot for the War Doctor, because one, she represents every single color so that you can have any combination of colors for your Doctor, which is really nice, like any 3-color tribe, or you can just leave 2-color if you don't want to. But two, she does what your smaller, your main companion does for less mana, but she does it for free, right? She does it not only, she says whenever a triggered ability of a Doctor you control triggers, it triggers twice, and it's not one of those 1 per turn things. So not only does your War Doctor gain time counters twice as fast, it always means that when the Time Doctor attacks, you'll get 2 targets. And I do really, really like this. She is 6 mana, but I will say, the only way this is kind of a problem, right, when you think about her being 6 mana, is if you were going to play, if you've played Adric, and then you play the War Doctor as soon as you can, and then you attack as soon as you can, and then you use Adric's ability right away. That is the only benefit he has over Clara, because you can do that 1 turn early. But I'm going to suggest, how big is the War Doctor that you're actually going to take advantage of that, right? If you have 5 mana, assuming you go for 4 to 5 mana, you have 2 mana to get some extra counters, time counters onto the War Doctor, which, because of how he works, and, you know, Bloodb Marauder being your only real Cascade card at that mana cost, you're only going to put probably 1 counter on him, so doubling his attack trigger is just not really worth it. Whereas once you get to 6 mana, you have Clara, all of a sudden you never need to worry again. The War Doctor will always double trigger as long as she's out. She's got quite a bit of toughness, which is really impressive, so she's a good blocker as well. I think just overall, she's very much so the superior companion. And because you basically pick a color for her, she's almost like just best in slot, because she just fills out any other color. Like my friend's deck is Mardu, which of course I love, to add black to this. But, you know, you just say blue or green and you're just as happy with Clara, right? So I find her to be very much so the best in slot, and I would heavily, heavily recommend her. All right, looking at a few more cards, 2 of which that I noticed weren't in here. One is Ryan Sinclair. This is a Doctor Who card, who says whenever Ryan attacks, you get a Cascade. Now, but the Cascade is based off of his power, right? So this is really, really good, because 1, he's a 3 mana and you have a repeatable Exile, and then 2, actually this isn't a Cascade. It exiles until the first non-land card. So it is a little weaker, but I will say for what it's worth, it does have the exile clause. Sorry, the Cascade clause of you're flipping until you hit a non-land, so you can get multiple triggers that way. Now, I guess I forgot that it is not full Cascade, that it won't just exile until you hit a 2 power or a 2 cost or less. So maybe I'm a little less of a fan of this card when I think about it, but if you can buff his power, you're going to have a really, really good time. But also, if he hits even 1 land, that's 2 triggers really easily, and I do rather like this. If you can adjust your mana, like your curve, to have more 2 and 1 mana cards, Ryan gets a lot better, and I think it's still worth playing. I do like he's not 4 mana. That's the main thing about it. But now that I say that, you know, of course, here's a 4 mana card, which is Belborca, Spectral Sergeant. So Belborca is nice because it just exiles the top card every single turn, and its power is increased by the highest mana cost of the card, of cards you've exiled this turn. Kind of clunky, but it's really nicely just another kind of every turn every turn impulse effect. I don't love it so much, especially at 4 mana, but it is another beater that I think is worth considering if you wanted to go that route. And though, once again, I don't really love it, I did want to bring it up. All right, the next bunch of cards are more kind of impulse draw cards that I felt like you were missing, and that I think will be very, very helpful. Starting with the two really simple ones are Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve. These two cards do the same thing where you just exile the top two cards, and then for 2 turns you can cast those cards. Now, granted, this is only going to put 1 time counter on your commander unless Clara is out, but this is card draw in your colors, right? And I think you should be taking advantage of that. The fact that it goes on theme with your commander, but at the same time, the fact that you're just kind of fine casting these cards and just getting the draw 2 for 2 is really, really nice. So I would like you to play those for sure. Another one higher mana, 1 lower mana. Galvanic Relay is really, really interesting to me. This is a better card when you have higher mana, but if you can get, 2 storm count, like 2 other casts on this turn, especially with Cascade, which make this a little easier, it will exile quite a few cards. And what I do really like is those cards are put on for the next turn, so you don't have to worry about casting them. And I think that's rather good. And every single one of these, unlike the other one, each is their own trigger, right? Because each copy of this card exiles 1 card. So basically you add your storm count in time counters to your commander. So I do like this. Likewise, Experimental Synthesizer is at 1 mana to get an instant impulse, and then when it leaves play, you will get another impulse as well. Not only is this good because you can sacrifice it by itself to get a 2/2 and get that impulse draw, but if you can blink it, which you definitely have ways to do so, like Saheeli, for example, you will get both triggers again. And as mentioned, because they are separate triggers, you will get that many time counters. So I do really, really like that. Finally, something that definitely feels like it belongs here, somewhat on the storm theme, is Harnfell, Horn of Bounty. Now, this is the backside of Bergie. Bergie is a rather strong storm enabler, but we actually kind of want this on the other side. The Horn of Bounty says discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. This is really nice because you can just spend cards from your hand to boost your commander, but also just what it does by itself is rather good. You discard a card you no longer want and you pseudo draw 2 is really, really nice. It's also good against discard effects if you're hoping to draw into an instant spell. It's just rather good cards. So I do very much so recommend to grab this card, even if you're never going to cast it on its front side. Which, don't get me wrong, you could actually cast Bergie, but I just think it's very, very unlikely. Moving on to a few more actually 2 general cards that I feel are missing. Very simply, Blasphemous Act and Lightning Bolt. I think they're just notably missing from the deck. Blasphemous Act is, after all, one of the best red board wipe, and it continues to be incredibly cheap. Wow, the full art one is cheaper. That's interesting. It is very cheap, and it never hurts to pick up an additional copy of Blasphemous Act. So I do recommend it. It seems to come in the Doctor Who flavor, so you've got it right there. And of course, Lightning Bolt is Lightning Bolt. It is a card I am very much a fan of when you're playing red. It just deals with a lot of problems really, really cleanly. Then finally, I have just these last few suggestions that I'm thinking about. The first 2 are really obvious, and they are additional combat spells: Relentless Assault and World at War. Both of these just give you an additional combat step, which is another way to trigger our War Doctor multiple times, where you can get an additional attack. An additional attack means an additional, attack trigger. Now, obviously, World at War is kind of interesting because it has rebound, so it will also go into exile, growing our commander. But I think honestly either of them is fine. I like World at War more because it's not 4 mana, so it doesn't mess with our commander. But it's not like you would ever cast this without your commander being out, so it's not that much of a problem. World at War is just a little more fun, even though your opponents will see the next double attack coming. But the other reason I really do like them is that these cards work really well with our trigger doublers, specifically Clara. Adric, you can only do it once, but if you have Clara out and then you cast World at War, you get 4 triggers out of your commander, twice for each attack, and I really, really like that. I think that's very, very strong. And this is something I try to think about and talk about when it comes to cards that synergize with your game plan, is you often want cards that synergize in different ways and that work together to synergize even further. This is what I mean by, you know, greater than the sum of its parts. Whereas if you just happen to have, you know, a lot of copy target activated or triggered ability cards in your deck, yes, they do work together in the sense that you can use multiple of them on the same trigger, but they don't like compound on each other. Whereas an additional combat step plus you know, additional copies of a trigger do work together to you know, you end up with more than you would get, right? 2, 4, yeah, that makes sense, right? Am I doing my math wrong? Maybe I'm doing my math wrong. Regardless, there we are. And I have one more card I'd like to suggest, and that is Flicker Whsp. And that's mainly because it's a big favorite of mine. I do love Flicker Whsp. When I played Modern, I started off in Modern, Death and Taxes was one of my favorite decks. It still is one of my favorite decks, even though it's not very strong anymore. A lot of people underestimate the strength of Flicker Whsp. Flicker Whsp is just overall such a strong card. This is a card that works with our commander, obviously, because it exiles things, but it's even better because it exiles anything. Whether this be exiling your opponent's tokens to permanently get rid of them, or this be for you blinking literally any permanent you control, and I have named a few permanents that you would probably be pretty happy with blinking. Flicker Whsp is just rather good. After it comes down, you can just attack with impunity, and because it has flying, and you don't really care if it dies at that point. Also, very importantly, it does have really sick full art, which is very important to me. So I think this would be an easy addition into the deck, allow you to reuse some of your things or have some nice little interesting interactions with your opponents. All right, and I think that's where I will kind of leave it. I do like this deck as a kind of starting point for the War Doctor. I think there's a lot you can kind of do to kind of figure out exactly where you want it to end up in terms of strength. But right now, the things that stick out to me, let's do a nice little conclusion, is there's definitely, if I would attack anything, there's definitely a lack of mana rocks. We definitely should have some 2-mana mana rocks, at least start with Arcane Signet, and then maybe Boros Signet or the Talisman. And then see if you want maybe a 4th. After that, I still think you should go up to 34 lands, you know, 36 lands. 34 just feels rather low. After that, I'd be very I look through the 4-mana cards that I talk about. It really does feel that we have too many 4-mana cards in a deck that wants to spend its 4th turn casting the War Doctor. And then finally, if there's anything I can say, is absolutely consider Clara as your companion instead of the current one right now. After that, I've shown you a bunch of different cards for both Exile. Obviously, I'm going to suggest Blastus Act and Lightning Bolt the highest, but the rest I think are fun cards that can help your deck be more successful. Namely, Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve seem to be the strongest, but I leave that to you to decide. Thank you so much, Lexa, for sending in this deck and supporting the channel. I do really like it. I think the War Doctor is probably my, let's do the really big one, is probably my favorite commander from the set. I think they're very strong and in a very fun way. I think they provide a lot of damage where you get to just play a lot of different versions of Exile. Like this has, obviously Cascade is incredibly strong with the War Doctor, but other than that, you know, you have a lot of different kind of ways to play with it. You could go for like a blink deck pretty easily. You could go for, you could even use like processors from Eldrazi, depending on your combination of colors, to kind of take advantage of all the Exile cards. You can use the suspend mechanic. You can use phasing. There's so much to play with it, play with them, and I really do like it. So this is my favorite. I think by far my favorite commander out of the set. So with that in mind, if you want to send me another draft of this, I'd love to take another look at the deck. And you can do so by going into the video description and filling out a form. If you want to send any other deck, it's there too. And if you want to, like Lexa, bring your deck to the front of the queue, there's a link down there for that. And finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, I would be very, very happy. It does support the channel quite a bit. Thank you so much for sending this deck, Lexa. I hope this has been helpful, and good luck building the War Doctor.